You've saved, you've researched, and maybe even run some numbers. But that big question still lingers. When can you actually afford to stop working? I've met with so many people who kept working thinking they had to. But once we ran the numbers, it turns out they could have walked away years ago. So let's clear up the essentials of what it takes to be confident about retirement. When it comes to timing your retirement, I've found that it primarily comes down to two things. This is based on the couple dozen one-timers I do every year, plus the ongoing clients I work with. First, it's your resources like savings and income. And second, it's the key ages when certain opportunities or benefits become available. Now, let's remember that there are other resources like time and health and relationships, which are arguably as important, but for now, we're talking about finances. Resources mean your income and your assets, so you could retire whenever you want to, but the question is when can you afford to with the resources you have? Retirement income typically comes from Social Security and/or pensions. Those income sources provide a base of income for you to live off of, and if you need more, then you supplement that by withdrawing from your savings. Retirement income is a big deal. It's typically guaranteed for life, so unlike an account, it shouldn't run out of money. Of course, it depends on who's guaranteeing that income, and we'll talk about the health of Social Security in a moment. Now, why do we care so much about Social Security? Among other things, it provides almost a third of the income for people over age 65. And for some people, Social Security is more like 90% of their income. Social Security is unique because it's government guaranteed, inflation adjusted, and tax favored. That makes it one of the best sources of income, and you can't get that combination from pensions or annuities. The average retirement payment is about $2,000 per month, and the biggest would be about $4,000 per month at full retirement age. That could, of course, go higher if you delay. The amount you'll actually get depends on your earnings history, so high-income earners typically get above the average, and lower earners get below that average. But you might wonder if Social Security will still exist in your lifetime. Should you rely on that income when you're making a plan? I'm relatively optimistic on this topic, and I'd point out that it doesn't have to be all or none. If you want to be safe, then yes, it makes sense to account for some reduction of benefits, and right now that looks to be about 20%. But there are other ways to fix the system that don't necessarily require cutting retiree payments. Either way, the system will be less generous for somebody, or perhaps everybody, but I think that the payments will continue. Only time will tell, though. Back to that timing question, your age matters when it comes to Social Security. Most people can start as early as age 62, but there are some exceptions, such as widows and widowers. Let's say you're born after 1960, so your full retirement age would be 67. In that case, claiming at age 62 would mean that your Social Security payment is permanently reduced by 30%. Put another way, for every $1,000 of benefit at your full retirement age, the amount you would actually get if you claimed early would be only $700 of that $1,000. You can find your own specific numbers on your Social Security statement. Great idea to get that. In this example, which is just a public sample from the Social Security Administration, the worker's full retirement age is 67. Her monthly benefit at full retirement age is $2,119, but if she claimed at 62, she would get $1,465. Subtract that $1,465 from $2,119, and you get a difference of $654 per month. And that's a reduction of 30% from the full retirement age amount. That doesn't mean you should never claim early, but you need to be aware of the trade-offs. For example, if you need the cash flow to live, or if you have health issues that point to a shorter life, then claiming early might be the right move. You can also delay taking benefits beyond your full retirement age. Your benefit increases by 8% each year after your full retirement age. Technically, it's a monthly increase, but it adds up to 8% per year, and those increases stop when you reach age 70. That higher benefit lasts for the rest of your life, and it generally passes on to a surviving spouse if you're married and you die first. Remember that a survivor typically takes over the bigger payment in a household while the smaller payment goes away after somebody dies. So maximizing a benefit can make sense if you are concerned about survivor benefits. Back to our example, this worker could get $2,634 per month by delaying until age 70. That's an increase of $515 each month over the full retirement age amount. And these numbers are all in today's dollars, so the numbers would rise with inflation if that claiming age is out in the future. So when should you take your benefit? It ultimately depends on your situation, your need for cash, your longevity, tax strategies, and more. There's no blanket answer unless you want to try your luck with a rule of thumb or an oversimplified viewpoint, which I don't recommend. You don't need to start taking your payments when you retire. You could stop working in your 50s and wait until you're 70 to start benefits if you want. Why would you do that? In some cases, it's wise to spend down your retirement savings as part of a tax strategy. That's especially important to look at if you have a significant amount in pre-tax retirement accounts like a traditional 401k, traditional IRAs. Remember that the IRS requires you to start taking distributions from those accounts when you're in your 70s. When that happens, you're forced to take taxable income, and you might end up with so much income that you get bumped into higher tax brackets. Your income might even get so high that you have to pay more for Medicare. To avoid those problems, you might spend down those pre-tax accounts while you still have control over your taxable income. After you stop working, your income is low, so you can decide how much to withdraw that puts you in a tax rate or a tax situation that's acceptable today and that also helps you tomorrow. Check out some of my other videos on that topic, and if you're finding this video helpful, please leave a quick thumbs up. Now let's talk about your retirement savings, or the money you'll use to supplement your income that you get in retirement. The question is always, how much do I need to retire? To answer that perfectly, you would need to be able to predict the future. For instance, you'd need to know how the markets are going to perform, what your expenses will look like, what healthcare costs are going to come up, including potentially long-term care. You'd need to predict inflation and much more. Since we can't do that, we just do our best. There are several ways to figure out the amount you might need on the day you retire. We'll start with an oversimplified and controversial approach that I don't recommend you use. Without spending too much time here, the 4% rule just ignores too many factors. It doesn't reflect the reality of spending in retirement, but it can be sometimes an interesting, quick ballpark estimate. That so-called rule says that you can spend 4% of the amount you had when you started retirement each year, and then increase that spending amount each year with inflation. In an academic simulation, Bill Bengen found that over a 30-year time frame with a 50-50 portfolio, you should be able to not run out of money, assuming all of the worst-case scenarios that were in the historical model. So let's say you have the average Social Security payment of $2,000 a month or $24,000 per year. You spend somewhere near the average retired household, let's say $64,000 per year. Since Social Security only covers a portion of your spending, you're going to need to supplement that income by withdrawing from your savings. The amount you need from your savings is $40,000 per year. And to use the 4% rule, you can multiply the amount you need each year by 25, and that gets you a result of $1 million, or that's the target account balance you would want at retirement to produce that type of inflation-adjusted income going forward. Of course, if you want to account for taxes, which is very important, you would need to increase the amount. So instead of withdrawing $40,000, you need to withdraw extra so that you end up with $40,000 left for spending after taxes. Assuming an oversimplified 12% rate, that would be $45,454 per year, or a target balance of $1.14 million. Again, the 4% rule is not the best way to go, and it might cause you to aim for too much on your retirement date. Your retirement might not be that worst-case scenario, and in fact, in a majority of cases, the 4% rule had people dying with substantial account balances. Plus, people don't spend in a straight inflation-adjusted pattern, and you can check out some of my other videos for more. Some other ways to figure out when you can retire include straight-line calculations and retirement planning software. I'll have a link to this calculator in the description, and it helps you to figure out how much you need at retirement, as well as how much to save each year if you're still on your way there and if you want to do some straight line calculations. But remember that this approach has you run out of money exactly when you expect to die, so there's no safety buffer for surprises from spending or longevity. Really, none of these approaches are perfect. For instance, you're not going to see your spending or your investments move in a straight line in retirement. The best approach is probably to use advanced financial planning software. There are DIY tools out there, Bolden, for example, and financial advisors can also provide an analysis for you if you're not comfortable doing it yourself. With those tools, you can get into a lot more detail and look at specific expenses like long-term care or vacations for your first 15 years of retirement or home improvements in 8 years or whatever. You can also project year-by-year cash flows and taxes, which helps you make a detailed strategy for managing your taxes. It's easier to stress test your plan, so you'll understand when trouble might be around the corner, and you can decide if it makes sense to change anything proactively. Getting back to the timing question, let's look at some key ages that affect your finances in retirement. Again, you can retire at any age, but your age might unlock certain opportunities or benefits, so get familiar with the timeline. We'll move through these pretty quickly. So you've got age 50 is when you can make catch-up contributions to IRAs, 401ks, and 403b plans, the TSP, etc. At 55, that is when you can potentially withdraw money from employer retirement plans like a 401k without paying a 10% early distribution penalty. Now, you need to get all the details right, so make sure you understand how that so-called rule of 55 works. Age 59 and a half puts an end to that early distribution penalty for most withdrawals from retirement accounts. But be mindful of the 5-year rule on Roth IRAs. And remember that if you have a 457, you might be able to take early withdrawals at any age without paying that extra 10%. Age 62 is the earliest age for Social Security claiming, but again, there are exceptions. You can claim pretty much any time between now and age 70, so it doesn't have to be a round number like 67 or 70. You get a slight increase for every month you delay. At age 63, you want to start paying attention to your income because you're within 2 years of Medicare. Your Medicare premiums might increase if your income is high enough, and they look back at your income 2 years prior to see if that increase applies. Then at age 65, most people start Medicare. It's a good idea to start researching this and speak with a licensed agent at least 3 months before your 65th birthday. That'll give you time to learn about the options and figure things out before you decide. Age 70 and a half used to be when you were required to take withdrawals from pre-tax retirement accounts, otherwise known as those RMDs. But it's still the age for qualified charitable distributions, or QCDs. Now, if you're giving money to tax-qualified charities, giving directly from your IRA might be a good way to do that, very tax efficient. RMDs now start at 73 or 75, depending on when you were born, so make sure you're prepared to meet that requirement. And it's also important to understand what's going to happen to your taxable income when those RMDs begin. While we're on the topic of timing, it's important to have a realistic understanding of how many years you'll spend in retirement. In other words, how long will you live after you stop working? People always talk about life expectancies into the mid-80s, but those numbers don't necessarily apply to you. That's life expectancy at birth, and you're probably in your 50s or 60s or beyond. The interesting thing is the longer you live, the longer you're expected to live. This chart has life expectancy at age 65 after you have survived those early years in life. If you're a healthy non-smoker, there's a decent chance that you'll make it beyond age 85, or at least somebody in your household will. So be careful about what assumptions you're using. People often tell me they're certain they'll never make it to 85, but you have to remember that medicine has evolved and you might live longer than you think. It's also important to understand how your spending might change because the assumptions you use could have a dramatic impact on how the plan looks, if it looks good, if it doesn't look good. So check out the video popping up for more on that, and check out the pricing page on my website if you're curious about working with me.